The roar of 80,000 voices shakes the stone walls of Constantinople's hippodrome. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, spilled wine, and the musk of animals waiting in their cages. Drums thunder, trumpets scream. And in the centre of the arena, beneath the eyes of an entire empire, stands a girl no older than 10. Her name is Theodora. She wears nothing to protect her, nothing to shield her from what comes next. The performance is called Leda and the Swan, a grotesque spectacle disguised as entertainment. A child lies exposed on the sand while trained geese pluck barley seeds from her skin. The crowd howls with laughter. Coins rain down around her body, metal striking the earth like a storm of silver. To the spectators, it is just another night of amusement. To Theodora, it is survival. But this night didn't begin here, on the hippodrome floor. It began with a death. Her father, Acacius, had been the bear-keeper of the Greens. His job was brutal but respected, training massive brown bears for blood sports before these same cheering crowds. In the Byzantine world, such a position meant stability. His family should have inherited protection and income when he died. That was the rule. That was the law. But corruption is stronger than law. A faction official took a bribe. The position was handed to another man, and in one stroke, Theodora, her sisters, and their widowed mother were stripped of everything: income, status, protection. Left with nothing but hunger, grief, and the pitiless gaze of the factions that ruled Constantinople. What do you do when survival demands the unthinkable? Her mother chose to beg the hippodrome crowd for mercy. She dressed her daughters in wreaths of supplication, paraded them before the masses, and offered them up to the entertainment industry's darkest trade. That is how Theodora came to lie beneath the hot lamps of the arena, her childhood auctioned before the empire's most powerful men. If you find this shocking already, hit subscribe so you don't miss the darker secrets ahead. The crowd roared for the spectacle, blind to the horror. Senators leaned forward, merchants tossed coins, and nobles cheered as a child's body became a stage for animals. Even ancient Rome's gladiatorial arenas, infamous for their cruelty, would have balked at such rituals. But here, in the capital of Christianity's greatest empire, it was normal, legal, applauded. What modern eyes see as organised child abuse was in Byzantium sanctioned entertainment, and Theodora was learning her first brutal lesson: that power could strip innocence, that survival could demand humiliation. But humiliation wasn't her end. It was the beginning of her revenge. The crowd is still roaring. Theodora's tiny frame lies in the sand, barley husks clinging to her skin, coins glinting around her like a mockery of treasure. But behind the spectacle is a deeper humiliation, one orchestrated not by strangers, but by her own mother. Imagine the scene: a widow broken by grief, clutching the hands of her 3 daughters. She dresses them in thin robes of white, crowns of laurel wreaths trembling on their heads, not as brides, not as noble virgins, but as supplicants, living petitions to the mob. She leads them into the arena. Tens of thousands fall silent, then roar in amusement. The mother bows low, her voice cracking as she begs the factions to protect her children, to feed them, to give them work. Her words vanish under laughter and jeers. The Greens, her husband's faction, turn their backs. They had once called Acacius brother, ally, friend. But now, their loyalty is gone, cold, merciless, final, and that betrayal burns itself into Theodora's young mind. She will never forget it. But then, the Blues, rivals of the Greens, they see the desperation. They take pity, a small act, almost casual. They give her stepfather work, sparing the family from starvation. Theodora is 10 years old. and in that moment her world is rewritten. She learns that mercy is a weapon, that power lies not in law or loyalty, but in who chooses to extend a hand and who chooses to let you drown. The Greens abandoned her family, the Blues saved them. 2 factions, 2 choices, 2 debts that she would one day repay in blood and power. From that night forward, the lines of vengeance were etched. But to the crowd, it was simpler. They saw children paraded like offerings. They saw laurel wreaths as symbols of submission. They saw little girls dressed for sale, and they cheered. The sound rattled the stones, embedding itself in Theodora's memory forever. Each jeer became a promise, each coin thrown a wound, because while the mob saw victims, Theodora saw something else. Not just survival, not just shame. She saw enemies. She saw traitors. She saw a stage where one day she would not be the child begging for pity, but the woman making the world kneel. The crowd saw children for sale. Theodora saw enemies to destroy. Theodora did not have the luxury of childhood. By the age of 10, play had been replaced with performance. Each night the hippodrome swallowed her whole, and the crowd demanded more. Her role became infamous, a ritual known as Leader and the Swan. She would be placed in the sand, turned into spectacle, while trained geese circled her. To the mob it was comic. To senators and merchants it was charged with meaning. But to Theodora, it was something else entirely. It was education. Because while the crowd howled, Theodora was watching. She saw the way men leaned forward, their eyes hungry, their dignity forgotten. She noticed how the coins rained faster when she showed distress. She listened to the gasps when she changed her rhythm, when she transformed humiliation into theatre. And in the private chambers beyond the arena, that education deepened. Byzantine law made no distinction between performers and courtesans, no protection, no defence. What followed the stage was expected, and the law gave the powerful every right. Most children shattered beneath this weight. Their minds broke long before their bodies, but Theodora adapted. She began cataloguing the men who came to her, their gestures, their weaknesses, their secrets. She watched how the mighty begged like children for comfort, how the wealthy became pitiful. By 16, Theodora was no longer just another performer in the hippodrome's endless parade of flesh. She had become its most requested attraction, desired not only for her body, but for the strange intelligence behind her eyes. And that is what caught the attention of a man far more dangerous than any drunken senator. His name was Hecebulus, the governor of Libya, one of the empire's most powerful provincial rulers. He controlled armies, taxes, and vast stretches of the African coast. When he came to Constantinople seeking entertainment, he saw Theodora, and unlike the others, he didn't want her for a night. He wanted to own her completely. His offer was unprecedented. Leave the hippodrome, leave the trafficking network that had consumed her childhood, live in luxury as his personal concubine. To a girl who had spent 6 years being bought and discarded by strangers, it seemed like salvation. In Libya, the marble floors were cool under her bare feet. Perfumed air drifted through carved windows. For the first time she wore silk instead of rags, dined on delicacies instead of scraps. But Theodora was not blinded by comfort. She was watching, studying, learning, because Hecebulus believed he owned her. And in his arrogance he revealed something far more valuable than luxury. He revealed how power collapses when it becomes dependent on desire. She discovered which words could shame him, which fantasies he would pay anything to indulge, which weaknesses made him reckless in his decisions. Every night became a private lesson in political psychology, every embrace a lecture in control. For 4 years, Theodora's true education continued, Not in the hippodrome, but in a governor's bedchamber. She realised that men who commanded provinces could be reduced to helpless creatures when their pleasure was controlled. And once again, she wasn't simply surviving, she was memorising every detail. But power, when threatened, always lashes out. The moment came when Hesebelus realised she was more than a concubine. She was steering his choices, bending his will, shaping his policies with whispers and touches, and he exploded with rage. Her silks were torn from her, her possessions hurled into the Libyan sand. She was cast out into the desert heat, alone, abandoned, stripped once again of protection. But Theodora did not break, because Hesebelus had made the fatal mistake of teaching her too much. He thought he broke her. Instead, he finished her education. The Libyan sun burned hot against her skin as Hesebelus cast her out. Her silks turned to rags, her jewels stripped away. All that remained was a body men thought they had already destroyed, and a mind that had learned too much to ever be broken again. She walked into exile with nothing, and yet she carried the most dangerous weapon of all, knowledge. To return to Constantinople, she had to cross the Mediterranean. Ship by ship, port by port, she sold what she had left. But unlike before, this was no longer about endurance. This was about strategy. In the cramped holds of merchant vessels, she studied traders who paid her for company. Their secrets spilled easier than wine. The olive dealer confessed where he smuggled contraband. The grain merchant revealed which officials he bribed. Each whispered confidence became a tool for later use. With every crossing, Theodora expanded her mental ledger. Who was corrupt? Who was weak? Who could be broken with the right temptation? The salt air stung her lungs. The stench of unwashed bodies clung to her clothes. But in those suffocating nights, she perfected a skill no empire could defend against, weaponizing intimacy for information. When she reached Alexandria, her transformation deepened. There, she encountered monophysite Christianity. To most, it was heresy. To Theodora, it was opportunity. Conversion gave her a new identity, a shield from her past. It gave her access to powerful clerics who despised the ruling factions in Constantinople. It wasn't faith that guided her decision, it was foresight. By aligning herself with a persecuted sect, she built a network beyond the Hippodrome's reach, a secret allegiance bound not by chains, but by shared defiance. Word of her cunning spread quietly through the ports. Stories of a woman cast out by a governor yet surviving through wit and audacity. A woman who could coax secrets from hardened sailors and merchants alike. She left Alexandria stronger than she had ever been. No longer the girl humiliated before a mob. No longer the concubine discarded like dust. Now she was something new. A predator in training. A storm gathering across the sea. And as her ship's prow cut through the waters toward Constantinople, whispers were already waiting ahead of her. Whispers that reached the ear of a prince. By the time she reached Constantinople again, one man was already waiting. By the time Theodora returned to Constantinople, she was no longer a child, no longer a discarded concubine. She was a woman forged by fire, skilled in survival, fluent in manipulation, and armed with a mind sharper than any senator's blade. And in the glittering halls of the palace, her presence caught the eye of a man who would change history. Prince Justinian, nephew of the reigning emperor. 40 years old, ambitious, brilliant in law and strategy, yet isolated, austere, and alone. When he first saw her, she was not cloaked in jewels or imperial silks. She was a former performer, a woman marked forever by the stigma of the hippodrome. But Justinian was captivated, not only by her beauty, though it was undeniable, but by the way she spoke. Unlike the courtiers who drowned him in flattery, Theodora's words cut straight to his weaknesses. She listened when others postured. She challenged when others bowed. And she did it with the quiet poise of someone who had already watched powerful men unravel in the dark. Every technique she had learned, on the stage, in the governor's palace, in the fetid holds of merchant ships, she now turned on the Prince of Byzantium. She discovered his hungers, not only of the body but of the soul, his need for companionship, his longing to be understood, his vulnerability, hidden beneath the armour of law and ambition, and she exploited them all. Soon Justinian could not spend a day without her. He invited her into his chambers for counsel. He asked her advice on politics, faith, and governance. He found himself addicted, not only to her touch, but to her mind. But this love came at a cost. Byzantine law was clear and merciless. Once an actress, always an actress. Actresses were equated with prostitutes, and no senator, let alone a future emperor, was allowed to marry one. The barrier was designed to keep women like Theodora far from imperial power. Yet Justinian did not care. The more society condemned her, the tighter he clung to her. The more the court sneered, the deeper his obsession grew. The empire laughed at the idea that a circus girl could stand beside its future ruler. But Theodora had learned long ago that laughter could be turned into silence, and when the palace doors closed, when the candles burned low, she began binding the Prince of Byzantium in chains far stronger than law or custom. Desire, dependence, addiction. Theodora had him. But there was one obstacle she could not yet overcome. One woman who stood between her and the throne, Empress Euphemia, Empress of Byzantium. Once a slave herself, she had risen from nothing to wear the diadem, to sit beside the emperor, to rule a court of silks and shadows. If anyone understood the dangers of elevating a woman scarred by the circus, it was her, and she despised Theodora. From the moment whispers of Justinian's infatuation spread through the palace, Euphemia made her position clear. Theodora was beneath them, not a noblewoman, not a bride, an actress. And in Byzantine law, that word meant only one thing: prostitute. She blocked Justinian's every attempt to make their union legitimate. She refused every petition, crushed every legal argument, silenced every whisper of reform. In council, her voice cut through the chamber like steel. I was a slave, but I was never a prostitute. I will not see one sit upon my throne. It was a humiliation Theodora had endured many times before, but unlike the Hippodrome, where she could only endure, now she had power, now she had influence, now she had Justinian, and then, just as suddenly as her resistance had peaked, Euphemia was gone, dead in her sleep, no illness, no warning, no slow decline. One night she was the immovable wall between Theodora and the throne. The next morning she was a memory, wrapped in imperial linens, carried silently from the palace. The timing was perfect, too perfect. Theodora had spent years among women who knew the herbs that dulled pain, the tinctures that silenced unwanted clients, the powders that left no trace, secrets traded in the back rooms of brothels. If anyone understood how to make death look natural, it was her. Whether Euphemia's death was chance or calculation, the result was the same. The final obstacle had vanished. Within months, Justinian changed the law itself. The barrier that had once kept actresses forever chained to the shadows was struck down with imperial decree. For the first time in Byzantine history, a performer could become an empress. And on that day, Hagia Sophia's marble aisles echoed with footsteps the world never expected to hear. Theodora, draped in imperial purple, crowned with jewels that glowed beneath the light of incense and candles, walked to the altar not as a victim, but as a conqueror. The same woman who once lay naked before a mob of jeering men now stood as the chosen bride of the empire's heir. The exploited child had just become the empire's most feared woman. January 532 CE. The streets of Constantinople burned. The Hippodrome factions, the Blues and the Greens, had turned from rivals into allies, united by fury, taxes, corruption, imperial arrogance, and above all, hatred for the woman who now wore the crown. The chants began as a whisper, then swelled into a storm that shook the palace walls. Nika! Nika! Conquer! It was more than rebellion. It was personal. To the mob, Theodora was still the circus girl, the prostitute elevated to purple. Her presence on the throne was an insult, an abomination, and now they demanded her death. Flames devoured the city. The Senate house collapsed in smoke and sparks. The original Hagia Sophia cracked and splintered as fire chewed its wooden bones. The rebels crowned a new emperor, Hypatius, and the mob surged in victory. Inside the palace, panic reigned. Advisors begged Justinian to flee, to escape with his life, abandon the capital, and reclaim the throne later. The emperor's face was pale, his eyes darting toward the harbour where ships waited. The empire itself trembled on the edge of collapse, and then Theodora rose. Clad in silks, her jewels glinting in the torchlight, she spoke with a calm that cut sharper than any sword. Her voice carried the weight of every humiliation she had ever endured. "My opinion," she began, "is that this is not a time for flight. For if you wish to save yourself, O Emperor, you will not lack means of escape. But consider this, once a man has been emperor, is it not better to die in purple than live in exile?" The chamber fell silent. Justinian froze, his breath caught in his throat. Theodora's eyes burned with fury, but her voice was steady, unshaken. "As for myself," she declared, "I approve of an ancient saying, royalty is a good burial shroud." Those words, spoken by a woman once forced to beg in rags before a jeering mob, transformed the room. Advisors who moments before had urged retreat now stared in awe. Generals Belisarius and Mundus gripped their swords with new resolve. It was not Justinian who saved the empire that night. It was Theodora, and her solution was merciless. She ordered the generals to surround the Hippodrome, where 30,000 rebels had gathered in celebration. With the exits barred, the soldiers descended, cutting down men, women, and children alike. The screams echoed against the stone, drowning in blood and smoke. Blades hacked, spears thrust. The sand of the Hippodrome, once the stage of Theodora's humiliation, ran red. When it ended, silence fell. 30,000 corpses lay piled in the arena. The mob that once cheered her degradation had become her vengeance. The arena that once humiliated her was now filled with corpses at her command. The massacre had silenced the mob, but inside the palace, Theodora's war was only beginning. She understood what few rulers ever grasped. Armies win battles, but whispers win empires. So she built a network of shadows, eunuchs in gilded corridors, servants who poured the wine, women who slipped between chambers unseen, priests who traded absolution for secrets. Every corner of the palace became her eyes, her ears, her arsenal. And what they brought her, Theodora weaponized with ruthless precision. Senators who once mocked her were forced to prostrate themselves before her throne, kissing the embroidered silk of her shoes. Courtiers who sneered at her past found their private vices exposed, their shame paraded for all to see. Humiliation was no longer her curse, it was her weapon. But some enemies could not be humiliated. They had to be destroyed. When Pope Silverius defied her in 537, refusing to bend to her religious will, Theodora didn't argue theology. She fabricated treason, sent him into exile, and left him to wither and die, silenced, erased by the woman Rome once despised. Queen Amalasuntha of the Ostrogoths was next. Educated, elegant, dangerously admired, she threatened Theodora in the one way she could not abide: influence over Justinian. The Empress recognised the signs: letters that lingered too long, counsel that felt too intimate. She had used those same strategies herself. She knew what they meant. Amalasuntha was found murdered in her bath, strangled in the place of her most vulnerable solitude. And then there was John the Cappadocian, the empire's most corrupt official, yet brilliant, untouchable, immune to the seductions that had ensnared others. He was too dangerous to ignore. Theodora waged war on his mind. For months, anonymous threats arrived at his door. Daggers wrapped in silk, wilted flowers reeking of death, paintings that echoed the torments of execution. Sleep abandoned him. Paranoia consumed him. Every shadow became an enemy, every whisper a plot. Finally, with her ally Antonina, Theodora laid the trap. John's own daughter was used as bait, his words of treason recorded, twisted, and delivered to Justinian. Within days, the prefect was stripped of power, his wealth gone, his reputation shattered. Once feared by the empire, now reduced to a beggar in exile. The methods were chilling. They mirrored the very tortures that had once broken Theodora as a child. But this time, she was the one holding the knife. Every scar she carried became a weapon, and she had many scars. Theodora's reign was not defined only by blood and shadows. It was written into the very laws of the empire. She remembered the hippodrome, the jeers, the helplessness, the chains of survival, and now, with a pen dipped in imperial authority, she struck at the very system that had created her. She outlawed forced prostitution. No brothel keeper could trap women against their will. For the first time in Byzantine history, the empire's most disposable were given the chance to escape. She made rape punishable by death, no matter the attacker's rank. A senator, a soldier, a merchant, all faced the same fate. To a woman who had once been treated as property, it was vengeance transformed into law. She expanded divorce rights, giving wives a weapon against cruelty. No longer bound in silence, they could leave abusive husbands, reclaiming some control over their lives. But her reforms carried darker edges. Theodora founded the Metanoia convent. Here, prostitutes were locked away under the guise of salvation. To her, it was redemption. To them, it was another cage. The same woman who once suffered under the mob's control now imposed her own control, cloaking dominance in piety. Her legacy was not mercy, it was contradiction. A saviour to some, a tyrant to others. When Theodora died at 48, most likely of cancer, the empire trembled. Justinian collapsed into despair. The emperor who had rebuilt Constantinople, who had commanded armies and reshaped Roman law, was broken without her. He never remarried. He never recovered. For 17 more years he ruled, but without Theodora, his empire was hollow. And yet her shadow endured. In Ravenna's glittering mosaics she stands immortal, draped in imperial purple, towering above her courtiers, haloed like a saint. The exploited child now rendered in gold and stone as eternal majesty. But behind the jewelled tiles lies a truth far darker. Her laws were born of vengeance. Her mercy was sharpened by scars. Her power, carved from the humiliation of her childhood, reshaped an empire and drowned it in blood. Historians still argue, was she protector, predator, monster, martyr, or all of them at once? One truth cannot be erased. The child the empire tried to destroy became the empress who drowned it in blood. If this story shook you, make sure to like and comment so I know you want more stories like this one.